The other lectionary passage for today is in Acts chapter 2. You remember the great Pentecost scene occurs in the beginning of Acts 2. We'll get to that in a few weeks. But this is the beginning of the church as we know it. And Peter has just given a really powerful sermon. And when the people had heard this is in verse 37, they were cut to the heart. And Peter said to the apostles, "Brothers, what should we do?" And Peter said, "Repent and be baptized." And then we come to verse 41. So those who welcomed his message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. Had a big new member day there. They devoted themselves to the apostles. Now listen, these are the marks of the church. We have baptism already, reaching out and bringing in new members, the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to the prayers. It's like the whole church in one verse practically. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, they spent much time together in the temple. They broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. I want you to think for a moment about your childhood church, if you happen to grow up in the church. Close your eyes for a moment and just picture it, the look, the smell of it, the warm tub feeling you have when you think about this wonderful childhood church. My first memory is of my dad's church in a little town called Hominy, Oklahoma, when I was 4 years old, which is when memories actually begin to register on the hard drive of your hippocampus. And I remember that we lived 2 doors from the church. That's where the manse was, where my mother, a little sister who was 2 years younger, and my dad lived. So the church was like a home. It was just right there. And I remember one day announcing to everyone that I was running away from home. My mother looked at me, smiled, and said, "Okay, I'll fix you a lunch." And I looked at her. Now, I didn't understand reverse psychology, but I thought, that's kind of weird. I just said, "Mother, I am leaving. I am running away from home." And she said, "Well, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Have a nice life." Okay, I took my lunch, made it down 2 doors to the church steps, ate the peanut butter sandwich, and then came home. Well, I have always associated church with home. And the whole idea of make yourself at home. That's the title of the sermon today. In many ways, that's what Peter is saying in this text and in the way Luke presents the whole story in Acts 2. Just make yourself at home. From the earliest periods of church history, the church has always been a little bit like a home. Which causes me to ask a question. What makes a house a home? Think about your own house. Think about the structure of it, the architecture of it. What actually makes it a home? It's what you do in it, isn't it? It's what we do. I want to offer several suggestions in the sermon this morning, and I think the first is we cook in it and share meals in it. I think that's part of what makes a house a home. And it's true of the church. I mean, this house, this home, we share meals. It doesn't matter what denomination you are. If we feed them, they will come. I swear it works every time. And it's true throughout the Bible, isn't it? God is always feeding people here and there, manna in the wilderness. Jesus is feeding the 5,000, which says to me that even God Almighty is concerned about lunch and God seems to be running a corner diner, and Jesus shares bread and cup with his disciples at the upper room. We have all these scenes of people eating, even the big Pentecost picnic that precedes the passage I just read today. And if you think for a moment, many of the problems that Paul addressed in his letters often revolved around food and what people were doing with food. Well, the truth is, Eucharist is our example of sharing a meal together. And what do we do before we share a meal at home? We wash up, and that's a little like baptism. So you have both sacraments here in helping us make a home. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper help us make a home because we wash up and we share a meal. The second is we make memories in our homes, don't we? Think about your own home, maybe the home you grew up in or maybe the home you're living in right now. You make memories with the things that happen, memories you'll look back on years hence. You'll remember the scratches and the dents in the wall and how upset you were at the time it happened, but now you can laugh about it because those are some memories you have as a family. Well, the early church had memories. And in fact, you'll hear these phrases again as we share the Eucharist. Jesus said, "This do in remembrance of me." These memories are very important. And in the early church, they met in little houses. They called them house churches before there were cathedrals, before there was a basilica, before there was any kind of building. They just met in houses and they shared their memories of Jesus. These were holy and sacred moments. The same is true with our families and our homes. Watching our children and our grandchildren grow up and watching how fast they leave home and they're gone. Empty nest is the sudden breakup of the family. I mentioned empty nest this morning, and someone at the door said, "You know what goes with it?" And I said, "What?" "Empty pocketbook." "Oh, yes, that's right. Of course it does." And Jane says I'm way too gleeful about empty nest, but I love our boys. I love seeing the backside of them as they're leaving because that means they're making it out in the world. We have these holy and sacred moments of our families. I go back and look at pictures and old videos, and my mind is a newsreel of the things our boys were doing when they were little, and I have these wonderful, wonderful memories. It seems like just yesterday. And I think, where did all that time go? How did it go so fast? And now it's over, but I have the memories. We have memories of holy and sacred moments here in this house that is our home as IPC. The memory of your child being baptized, or earlier when you were confirmed in the church here, or maybe later when you were married here at this very spot, as we are doing weddings this spring. Or maybe it's a holy and sacred moment when we celebrated your mama's life or your daddy's or your husband or your wife or your child. These are holy and sacred moments. You see, without these moments, without these memories, this is just a house. It's a beautiful house, Gothic, lovely, great stained glass windows, but without those memories, it's not really a home. I mean, in many ways, this becomes like a temple. It becomes like a synagogue. It's a holy place and a holy people theology, as the Reformers tried to remind us, and Jesus and Stephen reminded us that God does not have a specific place, as in the Old Testament with the Ark of the Covenant. No, God is wherever the people are gathered, and God has gathered you and me here. We didn't just decide, I'm going to church this morning. Are you going? Yeah, I guess I'll go. No, God has called us here to this place. And this is even a sacred moment right now. But these moments are precious that we have with our family, with our friends, with our fellow members of IPC. So if the first thing we do to make a house a home is to wash up and eat together, baptism and Lord's Supper, the second thing we do is we make memories. This do in remembrance of me. The third thing we do is welcome others from the outside in two different kinds of ways, receiving them as new members, but also welcoming the strangers, welcoming those who are hurting, which is both evangelism and social justice, not one or the other. There are two sides of the same coin, and they have their root in the twin covenants in the Old Testament. The Abrahamic covenant, where God says to Abraham and Sarah, I'm going to make a great nation of you, which was a huge surprise to them, that they were going to have a baby living in the geriatric facility. Medicare was going to pick up the tab. But God says, I'm going to make, we don't make the great nation. We don't bring in the new members. God is the one who has brought all these new members to us. And it's very special. It's very important. It happened in the passage we just read in Acts 2. 3,000 in a single day? I always kind of wondered, that's such a specific number. I always wondered, how did they get that? Did Peter peek during the pastoral prayer and count the crowd? Preachers are always counting the crowd. How do they get 3,000? That's amazing. But it's true, it's happening all over the world. The truth is, something happened that day. Why? Because God was there. God was bringing in all these new members. It's happening all over the world. I've told you this on Easter, that the church is booming all over the world except in Europe and North America. I've seen it in China and Russia and all over Africa. I preached a few years ago at Myeongsung Presbyterian Church, which at the time I preached had 7 services. I just did the 7th service of the day, and there were 10,000 in that particular service. At the time I preached there were 95,000 members at that church, and now today there are 120,000 members at that church. They have 500 missionaries all over the world. They have more. They just built a $100 million sanctuary, all paid for. I asked them, how do you do this? What's your budget? I don't know. God always provides, but I'm very concerned about one thing. What? Only 94% of our members tithe. And I go, well, that's how you pay for everything. The Koreans understand. God is calling us to open the doors and welcome people, to be hospitable. That's the Abrahamic side of the twin covenants, but there's a social justice side. It's the Sinaitic covenant, not just the Decalogue, not just the 10 Commandments, but care for the widows, orphans, and strangers. And we find that in the Luke-Acts tradition of the New Testament. The Luke-Acts cycle becomes the model for the 21st century church because the whole book of Acts is evangelism, and Luke is the only place where Jesus tells the Good Samaritan story. Did you know that? It's the only place where Jesus says, care for the widows, orphans, and strangers. Now, we have other scenes of caring for widows and caring for the poor in Matthew, inasmuch as you do it unto the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you do it unto me. We have other scenes of social justice, but Luke is especially the social justice gospel. So what we find is Luke is rooted in the Sinaitic covenant. These two covenants, Abrahamic and Sinaitic, are in tension with each other, but they're two sides of the same coin, evangelism and social justice, and we see both in Acts 2. We see it also in its roots in 19th century Christianity that is caring for the emerging underclass in response to the Industrial Revolution. We see it in the 60s, we see it in the 70s, in many social justice programs that spawn things like First Light, Open Door, and many of our attendant community ministries here at IPC. We see it also in the way the church began to become like a giant therapy center where people came for counseling and help, and in seminaries there were programs to train pastors called clinical pastoral education, where one was ready when people came looking for help with their grief or their lack of self-esteem or whatever they're dealing with. And what's great about that is it reminds us that as a church we need to be like a home. What does that mean? Well, it means that when you go home, you don't have to have your game face on. You notice that? I don't want to quote Cheers, but you know, where everybody knows your name, whatever. And the same is true of your home. It's the place where you can be vulnerable, the place where you can be honest. The church should be that kind of place. Some people were surprised that I shared so openly and in such a vulnerable way about my own personal grief last Sunday over the death of one of my beloved professors. But why not? Why not share that kind of thing in a wooden box like this? Why not share your honesty and your openness. Why would we do it? Because we are family. That's how we make a house a home. We find that the church becomes family, and when you are family, then you are welcoming. You're saying, make yourself at home. Now, some of you you've gone to people's houses, they've invited you for dinner, and they're a little persnickety about where you sit and how you act, and they have plastic on the couches. Have you all noticed that? Some people have plastic on the couches, you know? And I'm not just talking about Marie on Everybody Loves Raymond. I mean, you got to be careful when you go to their house. But there are others who just say, make yourself at home. That's what we're supposed to do with the church. That's what we do with our newest members. This is your home. It's our home. We're family. Now, what happens when you're family? This brings me to the fourth point I want to make about how you make a house a home, and that is to remember as family, we all have jobs to do. Yep, when I was growing up, mine were mowing the lawn and taking out the trash. And I've never seemed to get beyond those. I still have those too, mowing the lawn, taking out the trash. I'm glad not any more are added, but we all have a responsibility, and that was seen in the Acts 2 passage we just read. Everybody participated, everybody shared. Didn't matter how important you thought you were, you had to do something. Frank Harrington was the senior pastor of the largest Presbyterian church in the United States, Peachtree Presbyterian Church in Atlanta. At the time he was there, over 11,000 members. One autumn, his wife said, Frank, you need to go out and rake the leaves. He said, Sarah, do you realize you were asking the senior pastor of the largest Presbyterian church to rake the leaves? And she said, well, you can wear your robe if you want to, but I'm going to rake the leaves. You know? Everyone has a responsibility. When I was in Dallas, I took my turn periodically to go over and serve in the soup kitchen, which we called the stew pot. We fed over 600 homeless men and women right there at the church every day. They were smelly. They were the bottom of the barrel. No place to live. And I didn't like to stand behind the counter and antiseptically hand a tray over. I wanted to be out among them, so I always took a pitcher of water and a pitcher of milk, and I'd say, come on, fellas, help lighten my load. Come on, I got to lighten my load. Come on, take some milk, take some water. Come on, preacher, over here. And I'd come around. One day, I spilled milk all the way down the arm of one of the homeless men, and I felt so bad. I said, I'm so sorry. He said, it's okay. It's all right. As if to say, with all the indignities that I experience on the street, this is nothing. And then I found myself down on my knees, wiping everything up, and the room got very quiet. All 600 of them watched the senior pastor on his knees. And I remembered at my ordination that I was not receiving a king's scepter, but a servant's towel, as I continued to wash up and clean up the floor. And then, to break the ice, and one fellow yelled out, fire the waiter! And the whole crowd laughed. And I said, you're right, I'm a pretty clumsy waiter. And I said to the guy again, I'm so sorry. And he said, Pastor, it's okay. Don't worry about it, he said, with a gentle smile as he patted my arm. As if to say, we're all family here. And no one's crying over spilled milk. That is what we all are here at IPC, isn't it? We're all family. So, make yourself at home. This is the best home you will ever know. God bless you all.